why is the US trying to start a war with Russia? It's just poking, poking, poking. Russia had wanted to be friends with the US for a long time. We could be part of the Belt and Road Initiative. You have to Google that. It's like a global project that China is leading and the BRICS nations are in. They're going to have ports, railways, oil pipelines connecting, going through routes, delivering cheap oil. Like it's a huge project. I don't know all the details of it, but we're not in on it because we're just trying to poke at China, poke at Russia, poke, poke, poke. And I know there are a lot of people who are like, why did Russia invade Ukraine? Well, um, imagine if Russia came on the border of Mexico to Tijuana, which is just 30 miles from me actually, and started building up a military over a 20-year period. That's what we did in Ukraine. We would never stand for that. Americans are very ignorant because we don't have a free press. Our press is, what do you want to call it, in the back pockets of the government. Because if you say anything against the government, they won't give you access to interviews, and you can't be work for one of the major news outlets. That's why so many journalists have left their TV stations. They left The Hill. Kim Iverson left. Who are all the people who left? There's so many people who left. I can't think of them all now. Because, Brianna Gray, because they're silenced. They're not allowed to speak about the research and what's going on or do investigative journalism. They just have to parrot the lines. The U.S. has an agenda of weakening countries that are growing in strength. So that would be Russia, that would be China. And the weakening comes about by sanctioning and starting wars and provoking them. But the problem is that we are not the big, strong guy like we used to be. Russia is producing more drones per day, 7 times more drones per day than we are. And Ukraine is losing. You know, it's a war of attrition. Russia is doing a war of attrition. They're losing 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers a day. From the very beginning, it was obvious that Ukraine would lose. The reason that Russia had a difficult start is because they thought once they invaded, the US would come to the table and agree to take all of their military out of Ukraine. I wouldn't want China or Russia on my border in Tijuana. I like that we're surrounded by friendly Mexico, friendly Canada, and the ocean on both sides. I like that. Well, Russia doesn't have that privilege. They're surrounded by other countries, and the US has stealthily been invading these countries, building up a military through their NATO alliance, which is really just starting escalatory practices. And so now they're starting to do more. Now that they're losing in Ukraine, they're desperate. The military people know, and the White House knows they're losing. They don't have the manpower of Russia. They don't have the drones of Russia. But they do all these antagonistic things like bombing places inside Russia. They bombed, or maybe it was an accident, a beach in Crimea the other day. I think probably what happened is they were shooting down a drone and it fell on the beach. I think the drone was meant to go to a military site in Crimea. And Russia has a difficult decision to make. Like, if they retaliate, they could provoke a broader war. They don't want to take the bait of the hyperactive bully, the US, because they're winning in Ukraine. They're playing the long game. Putin is not giving in to the nationalists in this country who want him to just really go harder at the war because they're winning in Ukraine. And once the Ukrainian military runs out, then they can really go in and take over the rest of eastern Ukraine. Eastern Ukrainians are Russians. They do not want Western Ukraine, and Western Ukrainians hate the Russians anyway. They want a neutral zone. That's what they've said from the beginning. I do not think that they're equipped to take over Europe anyway. And some people say that Russia lost like 20 million people in World War II, that Russia saved us in World War II. But now we say that Russia is the enemy. I don't see Russia as the enemy. I think Russia is actually the peacemaker because Putin seems very calm and not so hyperactive. He's very calm and reasoned. He could respond to the U.S. provocations. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to start a broader war. That's how you know that he's not a warmonger, because he's not retaliating. They have weapons. They could take out the U.S. military stuff that's in Poland, that's stationed there to go into Ukraine. They could take out Ukraine, more of Ukraine infrastructure and bridges. They could bomb civilians like Israel has done. They haven't done any of that. They're fighting the soldiers through a war of attrition. They could retaliate by launching drones or hurting U.S. warships. They could do all kinds of things, but they're not. They're calm and they're rational because I think they want to keep their eye on the goal, which is economic development through the Belt and Road Initiative and BRICS, economic development, and peace. And peace means getting the U.S. nuclear weapons and the U.S. military and NATO bombs away from Ukraine, something they've said for 20 years. If you want to know why Russia invaded Ukraine, it's because the U.S. provoked it. I mean, what would we do if Russia started putting thousands of nuclear weapons or thousands of bombs, and China put thousands of bombs on the border of San Diego and Texas, all along the southern border or all along the northern border of Canada? What would we do? People don't even listen to the news. They just believe the propaganda. I'm surprised that these YouTube videos are allowed to be up and that we're not being arrested for telling the truth, you know. But maybe that day will someday come. You have to look into the history of Ukraine and the NATO expansion of Europe. Just Google NATO expansion in Europe. Because in 1991, Kissinger promised, I think it was in 91, that NATO would never go east of Germany. But they did, all the way to Russia's borders. And it's not good for two superpowers to be that close to each other. We don't want a superpower close to us. Canada's a friend. Mexico's a friend. And then we have the oceans. So we're relatively secure. And most of the people that I know in my personal life don't even know any of this. They don't watch the news because we're unaffected. But Europeans are very affected. You know, we're more aware of what's going on maybe in a neighboring state, but we're not. We're kind of ignorant of what's going on in the rest of the world. I just don't see any benefit in attacking Russia, and we are losing in Ukraine. We don't have the best weapons. China is out. China has more and bigger naval ships than the U.S. Russia has more drones than the U.S. They are manufacturing more drones. But in the U.S., it's hard to manufacture more drones because all the military money has gone to making like these very few but expensive like fighter planes and stuff like that. And all the drone artillery manufacturing is done by private enterprises. And for them, you know, I think they make like 500 artillery shells a month, and the Russians are making thousands. Like we're just undermanned. We're outgunned. I don't know what they're thinking. They're trying to hold on probably until the election, just like with Afghanistan. And then when a new president comes in, they'll be like, yep, I guess we're gonna admit defeat. But I'm glad that Putin is the peacemaker because he's not reacting to the U.S. provocations. The U.S. is on its desperate last leg, like a hyper little hysterical woman screaming to get your attention. What's the ultimate plan? You're going to try to weaken Russia? You already lost. By the way, the biggest terrorists are women. Hillary Clinton, Victoria Nuland, Madeleine Albright, Angela Merkel. The biggest terrorists are women. You know, these are not loving, nurturing women. They're warmongers. They're criminals. Women are not necessarily sugar and spice. They're just as evil. You know, the evil nature is not limited to men, you guys. So don't say men are bad and women are good. Hillary Clinton is a war criminal. But anyway, getting back to the point, I don't see what the end game is, except we're strong, you know, I gotta look good for the election. We're killing Ukrainians. They never had a chance, you know. I had a Ukrainian friend, and when the war started, or they call it the special military operation, but I call it a war. I said, "Why are they fighting?" She's like, "Oh, my brother's fighting, my uncle's fighting, we're for Ukraine." I'm like, "You guys are gonna lose. Like, Russia's so much bigger and more powerful. Oh, we're gonna fight." She's dumb. You can't, you, like, for what? She hates Russia anyway. She's probably a West Ukrainian. I don't even know where she's from. But Eastern Ukrainians are Russians. They've wanted to be part of Ukraine anyway. I mean, Russia anyway. But again, what's the point? What's the end game? You know, they lied to us. Russia wants to take over Europe. They don't. I don't see any evidence of that, nor do I see any ability of that. It would ruin everything they're trying to do with the BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative. That would be bad. I mean, they're fighting in Western Ukraine because their existential survival is at stake, just the way we would fight if the Russians put missiles on the border of the US. We would fight too for our survival, or if they attack the beaches in New York or California or Washington, we would fight too for our survival. But why are we in Ukraine anyway? Like, what the heck? Why are we even there? Who gives a shit? Most people are not even watching the news because they don't care. They know it's irrelevant, but it is relevant because we're weakening our alliances, we're weakening the dollar, we're making enemies.